Hi, this is Jen Rubin from Jen Rubin's Green Room. We're here for our week in review, and what a week it was. It seems like a month. Let's start way back on Monday, which seems like a month ago. We saw the complete explosion, the meltdown of the House of Representatives. Now, for some time, we have been saying the two parties are not alike. They are not both responsible pro democracy parties, each with their own ideas for solving the nation's problems. We have said one is dysfunctional, radical, nihilistic, destructive. And if you needed any more proof, we saw it this week. Kevin McCarthy, of course, was thrown out on his ear because despite all of that sucking up to Donald Trump and the far, far right in his party, you can never suck up to them enough. And once you begin giving them things, then they never stop. It's like hostage takers and terrorists. They can never be satisfied. So he is out. And if possible, we may well wind up with someone worse. Jim Jordan, for instance. Liz Cheney, who has been the voice of reason from the right, has warned that if Jim Jordan is the next speaker, we can kiss goodbye any notion that Republicans are there to protect the Constitution. I actually think we could have already kissed that goodbye. But Jim Jordan, who is crazed, hyperventilating, conspiracy spewing, he really would be a new low. Now, the good news is he'd be off the Judiciary Committee, but small consolation because he would be running the House of Representatives. And it will be, pardon my language, a shit show. These people cannot organize themselves. They can't control the crazies of the crazies. The so-called moderates aren't moderate at all. When was the last time they stood up to the far right? When was the last time they went to Hakeem Jeffries and said, you know what, we're going to make sure we don't shut down. We're going to make sure that we can get a debt ceiling done. We're going to make sure that aid to Ukraine doesn't get interrupted. They never do. They just go along. They shuffle their feet. They look down. They put their hands in their pockets, but they never really stand up to these people because they are scared to death that they will be primaried from the right. And while it doesn't make a lot of sense because some of them are in swing districts, 18 of them, for example, are in districts that Joe Biden won in 2020. So their real problem, frankly, should not be that they're afraid of someone crazier from the right. It should be that they have no way of differentiating themselves from the crazies of the crazies. What are these people in a swing state going to say? Oh, I stood up to the nuts. Oh, I was responsible in the House. No, they are no better, no worse than the Jim Jordans, than the Matt Gaetz, because these people are afraid of their own shadow and they're afraid of Trump. There was one very positive thing to come out of this. And that is, I think we finally got some in the mainstream press to admit that these two parties are not the same. And we finally had mainstream papers headlines reading things like Republicans' dysfunction reaches a new low, Republicans are ungovernable, those sorts of headlines. Now, why this wasn't clear before, I don't know. The pretense that we are somehow polarized, that it's both sides' fault, that we can't get anything done because people are too adversarial, all of that is nonsense. And it has been for some time. But the press has persisted until you get to a week like this, where it is beyond obvious, it is unavoidable that you see how delinquent, how confused, how dysfunctional the House Republicans are. So I hope one thing that comes out of this is that as the days and weeks go by, the press keeps that frame and doesn't give us the idea that we're going to have a shutdown because both sides are entrenched or Joe Biden wasn't able to get unity in the country. Well, the problem is we have one party that are a bunch of lunatics. And if there was some recognition this week from the mainstream media, that was at least a start. That was at least a positive development. Now, We saw a lot of Donald Trump this week, mostly outside of a New York courtroom. This is not one of his criminal trials, of which there are four. This is the civil trial in which he may well lose the ability to do business and have his name on buildings in New York City. And if you think this isn't bothering him, you can understand a little bit better why we saw him blow up this week. He has always decided he's going to rant and rave at court personnel, at judges, at prosecutors. But this week, he did something dumb. He went after the judge's clerk and passed along a ridiculous rumor, but really targeted this one specific person. And the judge had it. And he said, okay, you're not going to do that anymore. You have a gag order. You are not going to attack. You're not going to mention court personnel. You're not going to go after my staff. That was the first time I think a judge has ever laid down the law to Donald Trump and told him, you're not going to get away with this. Now, the good news is that there is a similar motion for a gag order in front of Judge Chutkan, who is the district court judge in Washington, D.C. And prosecutors there are also asking for a gag order because, after all, he keeps threatening people. He's intimated that the former Joint Chiefs Chairman, Mark Milley, who would be a witness, frankly, in that case, should be executed. He has behaved like Donald Trump always behaves. And now we're going to see whether Judge Chutkan joins the New York state judge and puts some guardrails around him. Now, when Donald Trump goes off on these rags, on these jags, we often don't hear a lot about it from the mainstream media. But once again, we're getting a few little rays of sunshine that they are perhaps waking up. We saw, for example, a headline at the New York Times. The former president used language that echoes white supremacy and Hitler. When was the last time you saw a descriptive, accurate, contextualized headline like that from the New York Times? I can't remember one, but there you go. We're making progress. They figured it out. And I think this aversion to telling readers and listeners and viewers what is in front of their very own eyes. This guy is deranged. He is unhinged. He is a fascist. Has to end. The press is no longer feigning any kind of balance or objectivity. This is just lying. If you can't accurately portray the major candidate in the Republican race for presidency, you're not informing the public, you're misinforming them. And that's what they've been doing for way, way too long. So let's see how much, again, coverage continues to drill down on what Trump is actually saying and put it in the context of other right-wing authoritarians, whether it is Pinochet or Hitler or Franco or any of the other 20th century totalitarian figures, because we need that. It's not like Donald Trump didn't have a playbook that he picked up that has been used, unfortunately, with great success in many other countries, in many other time periods. He may be particularly adept at social media. He may be particularly adept at pushing the buttons of right-wing nationalism and Christian nationalism. But this is a familiar playbook that many leaders have used before. And until this press starts covering him the way they would cover someone in a foreign country, whether it was Viktor Orban or Vladimir Putin, we're not going to get an accurate take on what this president, former president, is all about. And we're not going to appreciate the real danger that we see ahead. Now, there was some good news in the courts, and we are finally seeing the chickens come home to roost in places like Louisiana and Alabama. If you recall, they held elections in 2022 using districts that were the subject of litigation, that the African-American ACLU litigants had claimed discriminating against Blacks were illegal. But this Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, allowed these districts, these illegal districts, to be used in 2022. Well, that is now coming to an end. After much toing and froing, the Alabama legislature has finally given up defying the Supreme Court and has decided to draw a second nearly majority Black district. And that district will go from about a plus 29 Trump to a plus Joe Biden 12%. So that's happening in lots of different states. That's happening in Louisiana. That may happen in Texas. That may happen in Ohio. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel that the Republicans' effort to really rig and really gerrymander the system beyond any recognition is perhaps curtailing itself just a little bit, just a little bit. Now, Democrats aren't going to get any handouts, but they might actually get a district and districts in a number of states that they lost last time because they were in illegally drawn districts. But they'll be more evenly balanced, they'll be properly drawn in 2024. And when you realize the margin that Republicans now enjoy as people retire, as people leave, as people go on, is shrinking. It's only 2 or 3 people right now. Now, there's some unfilled seats, but it's very, very possible that with nothing other than redrawing these improperly drawn districts, that Democrats, by that means alone, may be able to recover the House majority. Not going to be easy, but it's entirely possible. Now, Donald Trump, of course, is never satisfied with any judge, with any courtroom he's in. They're all out to get him. They're all racists. And he has brought a motion in district court, which is very interesting and really puts front and center probably his only chance to avoid a jury. This is in the D.C. District Court, a federal court, where Jack Smith has brought a criminal case with 3 counts. Donald Trump has now made a motion to dismiss that says, I can't be criminally prosecuted. I was president. I have absolute immunity to do whatever I want. Now, this sounds a little bit odd for those of you who believe in the Constitution, and it is. He has made claims of absolute immunity in other contexts, and he's lost. So I think he will eventually get slapped down again. But here's the wrinkle. He may now be able to delay that trial past March, when it was previously scheduled, pushing it into the spring or the summer of 2024. That would not be a helpful thing because, of course, what we really want is a verdict somewhere in some case against Donald Trump before he goes before the voters in 2024. Now, I thought for a time we might get such a verdict before the Republican convention. But I'll tell you something. Even if we do, those Republicans are not going to part with him. This will just be further evidence of the plot. They will vote for him with more enthusiasm because it's necessary, of course, to vindicate him and protect him. So we may not get a verdict in that federal court case before, say, the summer of 2024. But I think we're still on track to get some kind of verdict. And when this sort of really extended hyperventilating kind of claim that I'm president, I could do whatever I want, and I can't be held criminally responsible for anything falls by the wayside, he eventually will have to face a jury. Now, if the other claim he made in this case is so bad, even Mitch McConnell has shot it down. Donald Trump claims that because he was, quote, exonerated, he wasn't exonerated. They just didn't get the 2/3 for removal in the Senate. Because he was exonerated in the Senate in his second impeachment, they don't get to bring a criminal trial against him. Does this sound right? No, it does not sound right. Even Mitch McConnell, who at the end of the impeachment said, well, the good news is we can still prosecute him criminally because criminal prosecution is entirely different than impeachment from office. Even Mitch McConnell understands this. So that argument is not going to get anywhere. And on the legal front, I'll put one more pin on your calendar, and that is late October, probably October 23rd, when the trial in Georgia of 2 Trump cronies, Kenneth Chesebro and Sidney Powell of Kraken fame are going to go to trial. And we are finally going to begin a criminal trial involving some people who were directly involved in the coup attempt. And mark my words, if they are convicted, and I think there's a very, very strong chance there will be, Trump will lose it. He will panic because at this point, there's very little that he can raise as a legal defense that they wouldn't be able to raise. And when he sees a jury of peers, of ordinary Americans decide this attempt to overthrow the government wasn't a unique legal theory, it was nonsense, it was a coup. When he sees that, I do wonder what his reaction will be. And I think we're going to see many more meltdowns before the end. Now, I will leave on one absolutely unbridled piece of positive news, and that is the economy. We're sitting here on Friday. The economy added 336,000 jobs. The unemployment rate remains below 4%. The average wage is continuing to increase so that it is now above the rate of inflation. So people are getting more take-home pay than they have to pay out for goods and services. This is unadulterated good news. So you go into the White House. President Biden comes out to talk about this. And what do you think the press says? The press says, why don't people think you're doing a good job? And God bless him. At least Biden said, you people are not a bunch of happy people, are you? And he's absolutely right. The reason people don't think that the economy is great is because the press dwells incessantly, obsessively on negative news, refuse to kind of level with the American people that we're going through a remarkable recovery in manufacturing, in jobs, in take-home pay. And this is a great success story. The press doesn't want to admit it because then they'll look like they're just patsies for President Biden. But let me tell you, this is very positive news. And if, as we certainly hope, inflation remains under control, growth and jobs continue to go up, we're going to have a rip-roaring economy for the balance of this year and perhaps next year as well. So if you're looking at these two parties, which is where we began, one functional, one trying to solve problems for the American people, the other completely crackers, fascistic, destructive, nihilistic, I really have trouble understanding how Americans could vote for those people. And they must have some criteria that's different than you and me. They must look at voting as a primal scream. They must think this is a way to own the libs and to get back at people who they think don't respect them. But voting for these people is not, in any sense of the imagination, a good faith effort to improve life in America. And this week, that became just a little clear. In fact, it's becoming so clear, maybe even the mainstream media can't ignore it. If you enjoyed this and you enjoy my program, Jen Rubin's Green Room, please tell your friends. They can listen and follow on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever they get their podcasts. Bye-bye.